In the language of the original indigenous people of Western Pennsylvania, the Senecas, one of the most important words that those people used is the word Niawe, which means thanks. They have a tradition of offering thanksgiving to all the entities of the earth, the living things, the plants, the water, the sky, the air, and all of these. So I honor that in my invocation this morning. My name is Miguel Sagué. I am not a Seneca. I am from a tribe from the Central American region of the Caribbean called the Taino people, the very first indigenous people that were encountered by Christopher Columbus in 1492 when he arrived in the American continental region, the areas of our area. So I'm going to offer, I've been asked to offer a prayer in my people's language, in the Taino language. And the prayer is Taino ti bomatung wakia baba today toka. Bagwa toka, kwaibai toka, pu toka today toka. Spirit of the heavens, give us the blessings. Bless, in this particular case, bless this gathering as is taking place here in this sacred land of the Allegheny region. Give us the guidance, the wisdom to undertake what we need to do here in a right way, in a good way. Tairoti pomatum, wakia baba tureito, tairoti pomatum, wakia baba tureito, yokahubawa maorakoti, wakia baba tureito, yokahubawa maorakoti, wakia baba tureito, tairoti pomatum, wakia baba tureito, tairoti pomatum, wakia baba tureito. Woo! Hanggang katu.
What a beautiful blessing. In a moment, we'll hear more from Miguel Sagué of the Council of Three Rivers American Indian Center with a special performance to further ground us as we move into today's important focus on climate. My name is Betty Cruz, and I'm part of the team at the World Affairs Council of Pittsburgh. We are grateful to be here with you today hosting our 53rd World Affairs Institute in partnership. It started way back when, 53 years ago, with Rotary International, and we're also partnering with Sustainable Pittsburgh for this year's Institute. We'd like to also thank our host, the University of Pittsburgh Graduate School of Public and International Affairs, and we'd like to acknowledge that today's program is taking place in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, the unceded ancestral lands of many indigenous peoples, including the Seneca, Lenape, and Shawnee. We are mindful that our work here is possible because of the land and lives of people native to this place were stolen. Generation upon generation, past, present, and future, of indigenous people here and all over the world are respectful stewards of the earth and its resources. Through this acknowledgement, I invite you to join me in paying respect to our elders, past and present. Thank you.
In the tradition of the Taino people, my ancestors, we use a very peculiar percussion instrument called the mayowakan, which is this log drum. I want to dedicate a song to Mother Earth, Atabe. We call her Atabe, the cosmic matriarch, Mother Earth, Mother Nature. And this song is dedicated to her. We say high honors to you, our mother. Taino ti, wakia ata. I honors to your mother.
Beautiful. And thank you again, Miguel. Maybe we can get another one. Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm Joylette Portlock. I am the Executive Director of Sustainable Pittsburgh, and we are so glad to be partnering today with World Affairs Council and Rotary International on today's World Affairs Institute. So our day-to-day work at Sustainable Pittsburgh is to help our entire region navigate the complexities of sustainability in strategic and effective ways. We connect stakeholders, we share information, and we've helped hundreds of organizations of all kinds apply that knowledge toward a future where everyone can thrive. Today, we are here to talk about one of the most important global challenges facing humanity, climate change. What is a global challenge is also local. 70 degrees in March in Pittsburgh is pleasant, but we also know that the increased rainfall, flooding, higher temperatures, change in spread of infectious disease, and increased threats to air quality are not as pleasant. As an energy center, our region has an outsized role to play in innovating and activating climate solutions. And we know that this work extends beyond our region and wraps around the world. One of the reasons I'm so excited to be here today is the multi-generational crowd. It's very exciting to see young people gathered alongside professionals because this work truly takes all of us to get it right. What today's event offers to all of us is an invitation. Let's renew our excitement about the work and the possibility of the things we can achieve together across sectors in this very intersectional space for our region and for the world. So thank you again for being here, and I'm gonna offer the mic to Angel to give us additional welcome.
My name is Angel Q, and I'm a senior at North Allegheny Senior High School. As the Interact Governor of District 7305, I speak on behalf of Rotary. I welcome you all to the 53rd Annual World Affairs Institute. Today's event is only made possible by the World Affairs Council's longstanding partnership with Rotary International. For decades, Rotary has placed a strong emphasis on youth service and leadership through its high school Interact branch. Today, Interact student leaders around the world are tackling issues like polio, education inequity, and, of course, climate change. As these students enter the real world, they will become leaders not of schools, but of whole communities, states, and even countries. Thus, if we want to provide a better world for our future generations, we must support youth leadership now. Starting a new chapter of Interact Club or joining an existing chapter at your local high school is a great way to make a positive impact while fostering leadership skills in members. If you're interested in learning more about Interact and youth leadership, visit Rotary.org for more information. Thank you.
Okay, so we have a distinguished guest with us that we'd like to invite to offer remarks before we invite the morning's panelists to the stage. Sherry Zalika Sykes is a senior level career foreign service officer with over 24 years of experience at the U.S. Department of State. She's currently the diplomat in residence for Ohio, Pennsylvania, and West Virginia. Her diplomatic assignments have included being the Director of the Office of Environmental Quality, Deputy Director of the Office of Conservation and Water, and Scientific Affairs Officer in the Office of Ocean and Polar Affairs in the State Department's Bureau of Oceans and International Environmental and Scientific Affairs. Thank you for giving me a moment with that one. She was the senior advisor on Africa for the Special Envoy for Climate and the principal officer of the U.S. Consulate in Durban, South Africa, and held other posts in Nigeria, Ethiopia, and Mozambique. Ms. Sykes earned her Bachelor of Arts degrees from Stanford University in International Relations and African and Afro-American Studies, and a Master of Public Administration from Harvard University's Kennedy School of Government. So please join me in welcoming to the stage Sherry Zalika Sykes.
I'm going to use this riser so I can see you. Thank you very much, Joylette, for that introduction. And I extend my sincere gratitude to Sustainable Pittsburgh, the World Affairs Council, and of course, Rotary for putting on this and inviting me to be a part of the significant gathering today. I was a Rotarian in South Africa for a number of years, and it was one of the best ways to engage in service in the country in which I was serving. And interact is, in fact, a wonderful way for young people to engage. So I'm going to talk to this gathering here of young people and professionals who have all come together to confront the existential question of our day. It is not a matter of some of us facing this existential crisis. It is everyone, everywhere at the same time. Today, we're gathering to gain knowledge, to increase our networks, to get inspiration, to harness our power to address this crisis. Our individual and collective determinations, to take concrete actions will define our future. Affecting the sweeping changes that are required demands that we elect and support policymakers who prioritize climate action at every level of governance, be it local, regional, state, or federal. Vote, 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 vote. Who am I not speaking to here? 18 and above. Vote. Engaging in democratic processes for every facet of government plays a crucial role in climate action, from the highest levels of our government to your local utility. Who are your utility commissioners and governors? Who are on those boards? What are their agendas? It is important at every single level. To combat climate change effectively, we must revolutionize our approaches. What are we saying here? Sparking bold thoughts and bold actions. Merely focusing on energy efficiency and renewable energy, while essential, addresses only a fraction of global emissions. A big fraction, but a fraction. The rest lies in reimagining our production processes, our material usage, and food systems. Embracing the principles of the circular economy offers a pathway to tackling the remaining emissions by reducing waste and pollution, by recirculating products and materials, by conserving and regenerating nature. All of these are crucial. So, how will you contribute to the mandate to reduce, reuse, and recycle? How will you, every one of us, engage in our democratic processes to champion a circular economy? Perhaps it's time for some of us to step into leadership roles ourselves. Perhaps we should become the policymakers. Perhaps you should become the policymaker. Consider running or joining local boards and commissions, even running for office one day. How about that? as your diplomat in residence for, Ohio, Pennsylvania, and West Virginia, I'm here to inspire you to embark on a journey in public service. You might be interested in embarking on that service this year with Interact. You might decide to join in your 20s. You might decide to embark in your 30s. You might decide to embark in your 40s. It may not be until your 50s, parents and educators out here, that you decide that it is time for me to join in public service. If you're curious about how you might contribute to international and global public service, I'm going to have some information on the tables outside. It is my job to help you navigate that at whatever time in your life you're interested in doing that. So I would look forward to hearing from you. My email will be out there. And so I urge each of you, as you work through today, to craft your personal climate action plan. Reflect on what you hear and discuss in each section. You have these notebooks. Craft an action plan. What actions will you take as a result of every section that you go to today? What emotions and thoughts have been stirred to you by the music, by the prayers, by the poetry that you'll hear? Reach out to me when you're ready to take some action internationally. Reach out to the rest of the people here in this room as you work through the day to work through your own plan. Remember, the power to address this existential crisis is in our hands. It's in your hands. Let's get to it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sherry. And I appreciated those powerful words and also the repetition of that invitation. Okay, so I'm going to segue us now into our first conversation of the program. We are going to be joined here by Jonathan Foley, Dr. Jonathan Foley of Project Drawdown. He's zooming in here to be with us. Hi, John. Hello. It is my pleasure to invite him to the program. Jonathan is a world-renowned environmental scientist, sustainability expert, author, executive director of Project Drawdown, and a colleague. So I'm very happy to be here with you today. And good early morning to you. You are on the West Coast currently, is that correct?
No, in the Midwest now, so not too bad. A
Okay,
little bit
not
earlier
too
than
bad.
you.
Just a little bit earlier. So I think we're going to jump right into it. I'm going to talk with you a little bit about Project Drawdown first. So Project Drawdown has analyzed climate solutions that together can dramatically reduce concentrations of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere so the world can reach drawdown. So the point in time when levels of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere stop climbing and start to steadily decline by mid-century. So can you, let's kick it off with maybe an easy one. Can you start by highlighting some of the climate solutions that will be most impactful, and if there are any you see as specific to the Pittsburgh region?
Yeah, well, again, thank you for having me here today. And yeah, the good news here is that Project Drawdown and now other groups are beginning to look at this more and more too. I've spent a lot of time assessing the landscape of climate solutions that already exist. And the good news, of course, is that many of them are here now. A lot of them are actually quite affordable or cheaper than our fossil-fueled kind of polluting world that we live in today. So that's the good news. There's incredible solutions across 6 major areas that we have to really be mindful of. Electricity, transportation, buildings, industry, the food system, and everything involved in agriculture and forest. And then last is kind of energy processing, kind of refining things like crude oil into its components that we use every day. The good news is there's always solutions in all 6 of those areas to make them first more efficient with even how we do things now, like energy efficiency, reducing food waste, the circular economy kind of approaches, but then to transform what we still use, even after we've gotten more efficient, in low emitting ways. Of course, the poster child for that is the solar panel, the wind turbine in the electricity column, but we have similar kinds of solutions across all of those other areas as well. And together, we've analyzed about 100 very viable climate solutions that work right now today that in tandem could actually help us get to that point where we stop climate change in the future and create jobs and improve local air quality and do a lot of other good things while we're at it.
Yeah, and I think that those last 2 points, creating jobs and improving local air quality, are definitely things that matter a lot right here in southwestern Pennsylvania.
Mhm.
And I also appreciated that you have, kind of this sectoral approach. This is a big problem,
Mhm.
and it helps to be able to break it into some manageable kind of chunks or frameworks to be able to think about how to address it. So, and I know that Project Drawdown, in addition to looking across these sectors broadly that you mentioned, which is how a lot of folks are approaching this. Also, you have a framework for thinking about how to prioritize the climate actions that are most impactful, right? There
Mhm.
are pillars for effective climate action out of all of the huge menu of things we could do. How do you prioritize among those things? You can talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, exactly. So it's not only helpful to have like a list of things that will work. We also have to know how to put them together in the best possible way, right? It's kind of like I can look at a food book and flip through the pages to see beautiful pictures of dishes, but now I want the recipe to learn how to make it. So we need to go from a list of what works for climate change to now how to do those things. And to do that, we often look at a few different principles, and it's up to you as a community and as leaders and or people in the community to decide which one's more important to you. It's not a scientist's job to do that, but we can look and tell you which ones might be most important to you by looking at first and foremost things like cost. Like, what are the most affordable climate solutions? Which ones might actually save you money right away or save you money in the long run? So that's always important for folks. Another is time. Some climate solutions are ready to go right now and have a disproportionately fast kind of track. Others take longer to implement and are going to be a little bit delayed in affecting climate change. So, from a science point of view, the faster solutions are obviously the best ones. Things like plugging methane leaks in oil and gas, for example, in your region and others, would be really helpful. Methane leaks in pipelines would be very helpful. Energy efficiency would be very helpful. So, cheap and fast are good things because you can do a lot of them and you can do them quickly. We also look at like geographic concentrations. Sometimes there are kind of these super polluting sites, like where a lot of the pollution is happening in just one place or one sector, kind of like a 80-20 rule. So we like to look at regions and say, hey, here's where a lot of your problem is in this one big area. Take a look at that first, kind of the lowest hanging fruit, so to speak. And then, of course, we look at what we often call co-benefits. Yes, everything we do here will benefit us in tackling climate change. But it's often really important to talk to communities about things that impact their community locally and right now. So these projects that might create new jobs that are good manufacturing or blue collar jobs, for example, or other contributions to the local economy, that's crucial. But also air quality and health concerns, and also seen through the lens of equity and justice. We often see that, forget about climate solutions. These are just solutions to improving the community in many ways. So we often like to look at those. And then it's a job of the community and its leaders to kind of balance out like, hey, between affordability and speed and geographic locations, as well as the co-benefits, which portfolio makes the most sense for us as a community to really get the most bang for our buck and the most benefits of taking smart climate action. And the good news is this is really good for us. There are lots of opportunities for communities to thrive here.
And you're harkening back actually to a conversation I had just before the program started about how important it is for us to remember that we're not just trying to avoid like disaster here, right? We're trying to build something better. And we have that opportunity right now. And as long as we hold that positive vision, we're going to be on a better path. Something else that you have said. So I watched your TED Talk, or one of them, and I note that you had a saying in there that I think was really powerful. Now is better than new. So recognizing that we need to be deploying as much of the solutions right now as we can, and it harkens back to something that was said at the UN, that we're walking when we should be sprinting right now in deploying the technologies that we do have. And I think that that's true, that we do have a lot of good solutions that at scale are going to be a big part of the answer here. But I think also, and you touched on this in talking about some of the more social aspects, that what's I think also important to remember is that the frameworks and enabling policies and the social structures that need to exist, that feels to be very much like it's still a space of experimentation and innovation, and we need to hold the space open for that. Is that something that you would agree with, or do you have a different take on that? I feel like technologically, I've always, coming from science myself, the science, we've got the science down, but it's where we kind of have that interface with society where we're still really innovating.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. I mean, the first part of what you're saying too, again, this idea of now is better than new. And we also say, like, time is usually more important than tech. That when you're trying to combat something as big and long-term as climate change, it helps to start now because you start accumulating impact immediately every year that you have that solution in place. So it's kind of, we talk about the time value of carbon, kind of like people talk about the time value of money. When you want to save for retirement, you try to save young and kind of build up a nest egg for the future. Same thing with carbon. Start now. Don't wait for the shiny new tech object that might arrive in 10, 20, or 30 years. Start today with what you've got, and you start bending the curve immediately and having a cumulative impact that's very significant. But every year we wait is a year we just dump more pollution into the atmosphere, locking in additional warming, and that's a big mistake. But I agree that probably the most important space isn't like in the high-tech area. So that's fun and that's great and very helpful. But we have a lot of technologies that work now, but maybe where the biggest innovations need to happen aren't in fusion or in material science, though those would be welcome. That would be great. It's maybe in the social innovations, like, what kind of policies, what kind of community practices, what kind of just way we work on things would help climate solutions not only be accelerated, but also end up building that better world you've talked about. Again, we're not just trying to prevent climate change. Along the way, we have the opportunity to build a far better, more prosperous, more sustainable, and maybe more equitable world that would just be a lot better to live in. That's a pretty good deal. Build a better world while averting a problem. Sign me up. But to do that, yeah, we're going to need some more innovations socially, economically, politically, as well as technologically and financially. So yeah, it's a lot to do here, a lot of creativity needed, and we need everybody on board to help out.
And the good thing is, I think we are starting to see a lot of those innovations happening. There's so many great conversations and so many different things being deployed in both that social space and in the tech space. And I'm not trying to say we don't need innovation, because we do, but
Yeah.
we have a lot we can do right now. And I think that's the message that I take from your work and from your speaking before. If I have time for just one more question, this is a quick one. Is there anything specific as it relates to climate action we can leave on this note that's inspiring you today?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's not game over, as we say at Project Drawdown, it's game on. This is a moment where if we really stepped up, we could change the world and make the world just a far better place. And how could that not be inspiring? Yes, it's easy to fall into the doom and gloom kind of trap of climate change because that's easy to sell. It's shareable, it's clickable, the end is nigh. We've always been hearing that. For centuries, doomsday prophets have been telling us the world is about to end, and they're usually wrong, right? Because people step up and change the world, and we have an opportunity to do that again. It's not guaranteed. It's going to be hard work, and we all have to do it. But we have the opportunity now of once in a millennium opportunity to build an incredible civilization, an incredible world that we can leave to our children. And I think a lot of us are beginning to step up and realize this is an incredible opportunity and that we should seize it and make a better world.
Well, thank you so much. It's a great note to end on. Let's have a round of applause for Jonathan for being with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and wisdom. We are going to move into a panel conversation with some incredible leaders doing the work that we're talking about. And I want to thank everyone for being here again for these great conversations.
right, excuse us as we move through this transition. How's everyone doing? Good? Yeah. Molly, if I can have you, and Sunday, I see you. Wonderful. If you can join us on stage. Thank you so much. I love that. I think that was a really powerful reminder and closing of the action that we can all be taking right now with whatever resources you have at your hand, whatever platform you have, wherever you are. To that end, we have an amazing panel here with us this morning as I navigate this microphone a little bit. So everyone's bios was shared ahead of time, so I'm not going to read you long bios. If you want to learn more about their impressive backgrounds, please do check out the registration page and you can go through that. But what I am going to ask is for each speaker to take a little bit of time and ground us in their background, in their work. Now, before I turn it over to them, I do also want to let y'all know, as Sherry was calling to us and Jonathan has shared, and you heard from Joylette and Angel, as you're inspired throughout the day, as you're challenged, as you're going through whatever emotions and learnings that arise for you, we'd love to hear from you. We'd love for you to capture that, for you to share your insights. So feel free to post on social media and tag us with the hashtag WAI53 at World Pittsburgh. We're also going to have note cards. If you didn't already receive one, it should be in your packet, but we can also pass them around because we do want to hear from you after I have a little bit of a conversation with our panelists. So make sure to fill out your questions and we'll be taking those in about 20 minutes. All right, here we are. Let's start by taking a moment to hear from each of you and the climate work that you're a part of today. Please share anything that comes to mind in terms of your climate journey, anything that you think is important for our incredible intergenerational audience to know, both business leaders, nonprofit leaders who are with us, as well as students and educators and advocates. We want to really understand your work, so just take a couple of moments and take a few minutes and go through this important topic. Sunday, if you want, actually, Elias, why don't you start? Closest to me.
Does this thing work? It
Yes.
does, okay. So, hi, buenos dias, everyone. My name is Elias Khan. I am, as of an hour ago, 20 years old. Okay. So I'm not sure if I really count as a youth climate activist anymore. I think I do. I still believe it in my heart. But I was born and raised in Western New York, and I moved here in the middle of the pandemic. So it was a dead heat as far as activism was going. But over the past 3 years, I've worked with Sunrise Movement Pittsburgh, and we've seen a beautiful sort of blossoming of activism that's happened sort of in the wake of the pandemic, with a lot of fantastic activists who are recently taking office, who came from positions of activism and youth climate activism before the pandemic. So my work is really focused on bringing power from folks who have traditionally held it and withheld it down to especially marginalized youth communities. And that's pretty much all that I am.
Good morning, change makers, and happy birthday. That's so exciting. I'm Sunday Bridget Jones, and I'm a Philly girl. I went to graduate school here at GISPIA, the Graduate School for Public and International Affairs, H2P. And I found my way to this journey of climate activism actually through the innovation of radical collaboration. I think John had talked about there are these other technologies out there, other processes that are really important for the work that we do. And I'm looking forward to spending the day talking about what it means to actually partner and network to drive transformative change. And we have had some amazing examples over the past couple of decades, dealing with vaccinating children around the world, is one huge example of great partnering. We've had partnering around the world around reducing extreme poverty, but that has been at risk over the past couple of years due to the pandemic and all of that. And I have been asked by colleagues and others about how do we end energy poverty, and how do we do that in a networked approach through radical collaboration, bringing a number of actors on board. And so I lead partnerships and our work in the Americas at a new platform called the Global Energy Alliance for People and Planet. An additional part of that innovation is that it has been funded by philanthropic capital, which is really important contribution to the work that we're doing at a tune of $1 billion. And what we're trying to do is to advance a renewable energy agenda in Africa, Asia, Latin America, Caribbean. So I'm looking forward to talking about that today. Thank you.
Hello again. I'm Joylette Portlock, Executive Director of Sustainable Pittsburgh. And, you know, I think where I come to this work from is a place of, you know, it's actually for me less heartstrings and more common sense, logic, and a sense of fairness. I think this work that we need to do to build that sustainable tomorrow just makes sense. And in many ways, it's what we need to be doing out of that sense of fairness, justice for each other and for everyone who comes after us to this planet. So that's my underlying motivations. But my background and my training is in science. And I've always worked in my career to help bridge the gap between scientists and really complicated technical information and everyone else who needs that information to make good decisions in other spaces. So I'm happy to be here, thrilled to be partnering. Happy birthday, yes, also. At Sustainable Pittsburgh, we work on a broad array of topics. As you may imagine, you can kind of make an argument that just about everything has a sustainability component or a sustainability facet or sustainability story to it. In terms of climate, all of our programs touch on this. We work closely with businesses, we work closely with municipalities and with other NGOs to develop regional strategy around climate, to initiate and to amplify practices that lower our carbon footprint, providing frameworks and information to hundreds of organizations. And we work to enable that regional decarbonization in a way that helps everybody thrive, as I said earlier. So really happy to be here, really looking forward to these cross-sector conversations, because to Sunday's point, this is not a conversation that is just, it's not just one sector. It requires us all to work together. So I'll stop there and hand over the mic.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here today, Betty. It's an honor to share this space with my fellow panelists. My name is Amali Tower. I am the founder and executive director of Climate Refugees. And as that name implies, I am solely focused on the issue of climate migration. You might also hear the term climate mobility, climate displacement. There are some distinctions between those words, but we are the only organization in the world solely focused on this topic. So my background, I am a humanitarian who has worked in the field of refugee protection for over 20 years now. And I've done that work all around the world. And quite simply, the term refugee only applies to people who are fleeing persecution that generally arises in today's modern context in conflict. However, we have more people displaced today by climate than even conflict or violence in many, many years. So while doing this work for well over 20 years, as I said, I really came to hear refugees, people who actually have that legal definition of being a refugee, very much describe their circumstances, their stories, why they can't return to their homes in climate terms. And this I heard a very long time ago. And when you work within very narrow legal definitions of what international law defines as someone as a refugee, you hear those stories and you think, well, yeah, that doesn't really apply. And in the context of doing your job, it's about trying to get to where does this person actually have a problem that's within the parameters of what the law allows me to provide. But then the second part of that, as you sort of sit with it for a while, is to recognize that there's a disconnect then, right? There's a disconnect between what the law provides, what systems then provide, what foreign policy and national policies will provide. Think of this in terms of US immigration and the US southern border, right? All of these things at the international level and at the, very like local level, it's the same systems. So you start to hear a disconnect between what systems are in place and what actually are the needs. And that drove me to, in now almost, over 9 years ago now, to found Climate Refugees, because I definitely saw where that gap was, right? So my background is in human rights and international affairs. So I approached this issue very much as an issue of systematic change, systemic change as well, from a principle of equity and justice, and the fact that if we do have a climate crisis, the majority of the world did not contribute towards it. This is very much a global north crisis that they have created, and that requires then global north, i.e. mainly the United States, to take very much a leadership role in how it's now going to be more fair and equitable in providing solutions. So I'm happy to talk about all of that later, but that's a little bit about me and my work.
Thank you, everyone. Amalu, actually, why don't you, if we can stay with you for a moment and maybe take another minute or so. We talk about today's theme is on navigating climate intersections, the work you're doing, and the work that all of you are doing. But the work that you're doing with climate refugees is on the front line, right, at one of those intersections. What can you tell us about where climate migration is happening today? If you could just take a minute and go a little bit deeper on that and the challenges that climate refugees are facing.
Sure. So I would say that there isn't a single place in the world that isn't impacted by climate displacement. However, as I said in my opening remarks, it is by far the most marginalized and oppressed places in the world that are feeling the brunt of this. So when we talk about the Global South, we're talking about all countries that have not participated in the enormous wealth, the enormous development that the world enjoys today. So you're looking at the United States and Europe and Australia, New Zealand, Japan, right? These are the historic emitters who have contributed to the climate crisis. That also means then that they have developed at the expense of the majority of the world. It's not an accident that the world is as unequal as it is. It's very much by design. So where climate migration or climate displacement, where the most climate disasters are happening today, happen to be in the most impoverished, the most, desolate, the most underdeveloped places in the world. So you have this sort of crisis of intersection. Anybody working in climate change will constantly hear you have to approach this as an intersectional issue. Well, what does that mean? That means if you're not dealing with climate change as a human rights issue, if you're not dealing with climate change and poverty, if you're not dealing with climate change and migration, you will not understand what that term intersection means. Now, having said this, you also have to go from the broad to the inner, right? And I would say, and the reason I say that is anybody who's marginalized doesn't necessarily exist only in geographic areas. Right here, we're sitting in Pittsburgh. There are people who do not enjoy even the average distribution of income or equality or any kind of prosperity that might be the average for Pittsburgh. There are people who will be well below that average. Ask yourself why. And then ask yourself, how are they more vulnerable to the climate crisis? So would it surprise anybody to know that over 3 million Americans were displaced by climate disasters last year? At least, that displacement was at least a month long. For about 27 to 41% of that 3.1 million people, the displacement was over 6 months. So think about the fact that, you know, the United States may not think of itself as having internally displaced people, but it does every single year. It should not surprise anybody to know that the vast majority of those people are poor, they're Black and brown, they're immigrants, they're undocumented, right? They're already living in places that do not have a fair share of development. They might be at the expense of environmental racism. So there are a lot of components here to look at. But I'll just end with this quickly by saying that if we have 114 million forcibly displaced people in the world today, only about 36 million of those people have actual refugee status. The rest of those people are asylum seekers. They're internally displaced within their own homes. And the climate crisis is greatly contributing every year to tens of thousands of more people displaced.
Thank you for that. Sunday, you've spoken to the importance of partnerships being really at the heart of the work that you're leading. Can you share what some of the barriers or untapped opportunities are that you see when it comes to partnership or the levers of change to move the climate agenda forward?
Sure, I'll do so, but I wanted to respond to a couple of things that you said, which is really a great framing for the conversation, because we are talking about addressing some of the extremes, whether it's the energy poverty extreme, the poverty extreme, migration extreme, those kinds of things. And it is true that those countries that are deemed in the global South, 60 plus countries, perhaps whatever the number might be, account for a fourth currently of the emissions that are underway right now. But if we don't do anything, if there isn't action taken, they actually can account for 75% by 2050. And so the question partly is, how do we work together, the quote unquote global North and the global South, with a variety of different actors be able to create the change? When we look at what is at the heart of poverty, there's a multi-dimensional aspect of it. And from the work that we do at the Global Energy Alliance for People and Planet, electricity is there. 3.6 billion people in the world do not have access to reliable, affordable, accessible electricity. That's half the world. And that's amazing to be able to actually, let that sink in a bit. And there are 800 million people who lack that at all. And I think that extreme nature of what we're talking about in terms of having access to electricity is really critical. I spent last week in Lagos, Nigeria, and much of that time was spent in markets looking at the impact of small business owners, seamstresses, and folks who are selling small goods, those kinds of things. The impact of moving from using diesel generators, the noise, the pollution, the cost of petrol, to actually have those diesel generators run, to actually moving to solar battery systems is tremendous. We've noticed a 30% reduction of cost for them, and what they could do with that cost savings is really important. And we've also noticed additional, I think, benefits from having electricity on with no air pollution or noise pollution, being able to work longer hours than anticipated, and perhaps having that energy stored when there are storms or those kinds of things for them to be able to use. But even at that level, it requires a different kind of partnering, a different kind of collaboration. And we usually hear about the collaboration that takes place between local governments or governments and companies. But I think here, this is the kind of collaboration that requires all hands on deck. where communities are really at the center of change. And those people in those communities are so critical to voicing the needs that they have to be able to make that transition, that energy, a very just, equitable energy transition from where they are now. And so at the heart of what we're trying to do is to bring those energy companies, philanthropists, governments, civil activists, but also creatives together to be able to figure out how to make the change. And, you know, partnering is a language that has currency in the development space or in any change space, but people don't really, I think, appreciate how challenging it is to move from I'm partnering with you to let's figure out how do we do this in a more networked approach. And that was part of the work that I had, you know, done last week of bringing together multilateral development banks and others who are part of this effort to figure out how do we have a shared vision, have shared metrics, shared resources that we put into being supportive of renewable energy technologies and processes to be able to move things forward. So that's just one example of that.
That's great. You want to add? Go for it.
Yeah, there's so much to touch on there with the last two comments. That's very, very important, right? We know that across the globe, it's the folks with the fewest resources who are hardest hit by climate impacts. That's true, absolutely, and in devastating ways in the global South. That's true here at home, in the US, in Southwestern Pennsylvania. You noted this concept of energy burden, electricity access, even here in Southwestern Pennsylvania. Analysis that we've done at Sustainable Pittsburgh, looking at using the federal climate economic justice screening tool to look at census tracts and what the burdens being held by the disadvantaged, that's the federal government's term, disadvantaged census tracts, are in our region. Energy burden pops as in top 4 in several of the counties in the 10-county region. So it very much is an issue here. And so how do you address these things, right? I think step 1 is awareness and incorporation of these very important needs into the conversation, into the solution building space, right? Because otherwise they have a tendency to become invisible, which is not great if we want to actually get to that future. And then I think the point about partnerships and the intersectionality is just so critical. I'll give just one example of work that we're doing. So in addition to frameworks and information about sustainability broadly, we also host a number of networks, one of which that's been gathering momentum over the past couple of years is around clean energy workforce development. And through that network, we've been able to bring together community-based organizations, education and training institutions, governmental agencies, employers, to have that conversation, which is hard, not necessarily because people don't want to have that conversation, but figuring out how to activate through a network and really catalyze change. It requires many conversations and investment. And so we're starting to now see the partnerships that can be created through doing that kind of work, but it requires all of those stakeholders at the table. And yeah, I mean, I just wanted to just echo, what my fellow panelists are saying. Partnerships are super important. The needs of all of our communities are super important. And doing that work is the challenge of our time. We are in a space now, though, where I do start to see, if you look at how the recent federal legislation, the Inflation in the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and the Inflation Reduction Act, both build in, for really the first time in a big way, a lot of these equity pieces. And are they being, is it perfect? No, because we're in an innovation space, but it's much, much, much more encouraging, I think, to see a lot of these pieces built in for, centering equity, even as we're addressing climate, because to Jonathan's point, right, this is this is an enormous opportunity. We've used the word generational 1,000 times. So we've used the word, once in a millennium. This is such an important opportunity to address climate, and it is essential that we are also looking at the equity implications at the same time, because we can actually address both of these chronic issues if we're thoughtful about it.
Thank you. Thank you for that. We've been talking about partnerships. I hear you saying equity, innovation. Of course, I naturally think of the role of youth and the work that you've been leading as a youth activist and leader, Elias. Can you speak to why it's important for institutions to see youth as leaders, as co-designers with them?
Absolutely. So, to kind of piggyback off of the point of steps, right? As an activist with Sunrise Movement Pittsburgh, we have a very simple, like, step-by-step process. You're getting Activism 101 here, folks, so that when you go back to your high schools, you can do things and annoy your principals with it. Anyway, so first step is obviously education and engagement, right? That's like the baseline. Every action that we engage with starts from education. And a lot of companies, a lot of change and policy makers who are in government right now, frankly, are not well educated on a lot of the issues of the climate crisis, particularly equity. Unfortunately, there's a lack of education purposefully about the importance of equity issues in the United States, in even the highest parts of the United States' government. And part of what we've done at Sunrise Pittsburgh is go meet with policymakers, go meet with companies, and directly engage them in education from a youth perspective, right? This is who we are. This is why we're coming to this. This is information that we can give to you that you may already have or you may not. And we hope that you take it and learn from it. The second step is partnership and engagement. Once you've established that educational baseline, now you have a relationship, you have a rapport, you can go forward from there. Part of the process that Sunrise Pittsburgh engages with to work with policymakers is we start by meeting with them, and gradually we build up to a point where in our relationship together, we can endorse them and they vice versa can help us push policy points and agenda items. And this is, exactly what we've done with Summer Lee and Sarah Namorato and Dan Gerzabek and all kinds of other policymakers here in Allegheny County, and who have gone back to Washington to move on things like the IRA and the bipartisan infrastructure bill, both of which, we worked on. And that's the sort of third step here is action. Because once you have education and once you have partnership, the question becomes, what do you do with this power that you are building here? Because as young people, we've always had a contentious relationship with power. You can see that young people have tremendous power. In the 60s, we shaped the entire planet's political consciousness through tremendous youth movements. And then at the same time, conversely, we are consistently infantilized all throughout history for being powerless and weak. How can this dichotomy exist? And the reality is that it's a purposeful dichotomy, because when young people do engage in action, when we take our 2 steps, right, and then build off of that into that third step, it's incredibly disorienting for people who have traditionally withheld power from marginalized communities, from youth communities, because they expect a certain exploitation from us. Right? And when we turn that around, when we say, no, in fact, you are agents of our change, of our power, then suddenly, you've turned the whole system on its head. And that's exactly what the power of youth action is, and why people need to start seeing young people as co-partners in what's happening. Because when young people turn things on their heads, you can either be the one who's surprised or the one who's ready for it, the one who is capable of meeting the challenge of change. If you're not ready for it, you'll get swept away. I promise you. Our generation is bigger than any generation before us. That means, I'm not a math person, but that means we have crazy numbers, y'all. And on an economic level, that is some serious change that's coming. So the question for folks who are still hesitant about engaging with us as equals is, are you really willing to get swept away? Is that what you're willing to let happen? I think that's, that's a fair question to ask, and that's what a lot of these companies need to be asking when they see us coming to the table.
Whew, thank you for that. We have, your note cards are being collected, so if you have any answers or any questions that you want the panel to speak to, please lift up your hand. We'll walk around and gather those. We did ask the audience for some questions ahead of time, so I have a few to get us going. Can you share just simply, and some of you have spoken to this already, but what are some specific examples of climate action? Open to anyone. I know. How specific? You just walked through a quick list. Does anybody else have like your 1, 2, 3 that really are at the surface that you think the audience should hear?
I will start with, there's so many to choose from. I mean, I think, and it's interesting to me to having been kind of in this space for the length of time that I have, that how much farther we are in some of these conversations. We have enabling legislation at the federal level. We have a generally recognized challenge before us. We have a lot of people thinking about this. So I will say that anytime I see, and I know we'll hear about this on in later conversations today, anytime I see, a group or a municipality or a company making a deliberate and effective and thoughtful, comprehensive plan around how to address these things as the first step, like, that is incredibly encouraging, and it's happening so much more now than it was, in very concrete ways, not pie in the sky ways, but in, what are our real needs? How can we affect them in our place? And how can we push that forward? And then, I'll go back to the fact that we do have resources now to enable these things. We have resources to build renewable sources of energy. We're having real conversations about what that can look like in this region. And we're having real conversations about how to make sure that communities that have been left out of these conversations forever are included. So I guess all of that feels like climate action to me, even though some of it might not be specifically pointed to as an immediate thing when you think climate. A lot of times we get stuck in just an energy conversation. It's not just energy.
That's great. Yeah, thank you. And one of the sessions later, we'll be hearing from Connect, the Congress of Neighboring Communities, on their climate action plan. Anybody else want to tackle that one?
I see a lot of cards in Dara's hands, so I'll just add on to say, I think sometimes when you're sitting in rooms like this, and I know all of us probably do a lot of speaking about this, and it just sort of feels like, okay, so what's my role? I've heard this expression. It's not one of mine, but think globally, act locally. I think that's how it goes. So what does that mean? Okay. If you're not, so it's about vision. What kind of world do you want? And then disseminate that into every strata of society. So we heard someone say earlier, right? Vote, vote, vote. Is it only about national elections? No, it's about local elections, right? That's actually where the power is. It's about consumerism. Who do you buy from and who do you not buy from? Who do you boycott? It's about, are we waging wars that are completely contrary to climate solutions? So it's about weaving your vision, which I hope matches your values, through every single sector and strata of society at whichever level you're engaged in. You cannot have national leaders who are disconnected from the local solutions you need. You cannot have international policymaking that is disconnected from federal, state, and local solutions. And if you could, I would hope, live your life thinking that what I want should be exactly the same need that I should be striving to fight for across the world, because there is no difference between human beings, then I really don't think you can fail to hold people accountable as well as yourself accountable in terms of the actions you take. So we can get into all the weeds and the specifics, but it's really about your global view and your moral compass, you know? So I would just leave it at that, that's the question you need to be engaging with every single day of your life. We don't just need activism, we need sustainable activism.
I'm going to move to one of the questions. Thanks for that. That was powerful, Amali. We want to talk about the business community a little bit. So this question from an audience member asks, what are the biggest challenges when convincing business to incorporate sustainability?
I'll take that one. We work with many businesses, from small, even sole proprietorships through our small business program to large multinational companies that have, the resources to be very sophisticated in their approaches to this. I think, one key consideration always, and Jonathan touched on this in his remarks, is going to be cost. Is going to be figuring out really, how this is effective and good business strategy, and luckily it is, especially in today's world and today's markets, where you're seeing increased awareness and importance placed on these topics by investors, by employees, by consumers. For businesses, there is a real true value in investing in a sustainability strategy, investing in communities, and looking out long term. But I think that can sometimes be an initial stumbling block. I will say that we do have a lot of great examples here regionally of companies that have embraced sustainability as a core value, not just from a feel-good perspective, but from that business case as well, and who are advancing that. So, that happens most effectively when it isn't just, one person that was hired to be the sustainability person in kind of a side office with, not an ability to talk to anybody else. We see much more now that companies are starting to recognize that position or that team of positions needs to be integrated across the company, because a true sustainability strategy, including the efforts toward carbon reduction, touch every department within a company. So I think it's really important. I think that, as I said earlier, there are these pressures and the recognition of these topics as important from employees, from consumers. It is also really important and encouraging to see top-down leadership embracing this with CEOs. We convene a network of CEOs for sustainability with boards of these companies, really building this into their overall strategy. So it's a challenge, but I think that we're starting to see increased awareness and understanding that this is not, it's no longer optional. We held an event a couple of years ago. The Vice President of Sustainability for Microsoft was speaking and said point blank, right? This is the way that business needs to be conducted. And if you're not doing that, then you will be left behind. It's a competitive disadvantage in the business community to not be thinking about these things. So we're starting to see, increasing awareness for that. And we just keep bringing the information and the education to people, and operationalizing mechanisms for that change to happen.
Great, thank you. This is a question for anyone who would like to take it, and it's to the point on awareness building, and then there's one specific for you, Amali. So how can we spread awareness? And as it relates to climate refugees, how can we as members of the Pittsburgh community advocate for climate refugees?
I'll take that first one. So awareness is, I think, like, everyone is, to a certain degree, because of mass media, aware peripherally of something called climate change, of something called the climate crisis. But, you know, like we've been saying quite a bit, you know, this conversation of equity is still very new to a lot of people, unfortunately. And I think the real education and awareness now must come in the form of working to make intersectionality the norm. Because in some communities it still isn't, right? We don't see the importance of the union and the Green Party people who are trying to protect parks as being, you know, part of the same potential coalition. We don't see the importance of Black and brown communities that have been historically marginalized, working with wealthy white communities that have historically marginalized them to address those marginalizations as part of a broader climate strategy. You know, these conversations are still very difficult because they're sore, right? Because they're still painful to process. But I think that when we, as Pittsburghers, as people from Southwest PA, are confronted with a lack of awareness, it's no longer about whether or not climate change, you know, exists in the public consciousness. It's about whether or not we, as members of this community, are willing to recognize that climate change impacts us in more ways than just, you know, the weather, right? So that's I think, if we can all come away from this and say, you know, intersectionality is our MO, and from here on out, everyone that we talk to, that is how we introduce ourselves with our MO is intersectionality. I think that's enough for starters, right? To spread awareness.
Great.
Well, I think, yeah, absolutely. That's if we go off of that and we think about what can you here do in Pittsburgh about people who are climate displaced? Okay. So why I said earlier about, you know, how does your vision match your values? And why there can't be any disconnect at international levels and local levels is because if there is a disconnect, then you're obviously working against one another, right? There's so many things I can say. So let's start with, how about if we change our mindset at US national levels, local levels, it doesn't matter, of looking at migration as a right, which by the way it is, right? International human rights law will tell you that migration is a right. Ask yourself if we live in a world that reflects that. Last time I looked, migration seems to be penalized with jails and detentions and making sure that we do everything we can to ensure border security over human security. Right? So if you don't want a world that looks like that, your local elected officials should be actually living out their values, which is that migration and being open to it isn't an act of charity. It's also not a burden. It's a responsibility. It's an obligation under international law, under national law, therefore under state and local law as well. Also, if migration is a right, then we should be working to ensure that that there's a right to stay. Most of the folks who are coming to the US southern border are not coming here because they're ensured any rights. They're not coming here because they're actually being treated with dignity. They're coming here because they have an alarming lack of choice. That's called forced migration. Forced migration should trigger responsibility and obligation under those laws that I mentioned. It should also trigger the question, why are people moving? And that should then enforce a whole other set of policies that investigate what are the drivers? How are they connected to climate? Going back to Elias's point about intersectionality. And if we're gonna talk about a climate crisis and solutions, then you should already know that you have an obligation to find solutions for people who are displaced by both the sudden onset effects of climate change and the slow onset effects. What is slow onset effects? What is that? How does a warming planet erode livelihood? How does a warming planet affect a largely agrarian global population? How does it affect the distribution of resources? How does it affect economic security? Those are all things that contribute towards forced migration for the majority of the world today. And if the United States isn't stepping up, if Pittsburgh, if Pennsylvania isn't stepping up, then it's a failure to understand a responsibility and an obligation. We need to stop with this whole burden and charity and as if like, you know, these narratives of, oh, the US can't take in anymore. The US doesn't take in people. So I would really strongly advocate for you all to think about reframing the conversations that our elected officials want you to have, rejecting it, doing a little bit of research and looking for yourself. Does this actually, you know, jive with what I'm seeing in the world? If the global South is, you know, vastly vulnerable to the forced migration dimensions today, what is our role in creating a world that enforces that upon them? And then what is our role in making sure we do everything we can to spend over 3 times more on ensuring our borders and keeping people out than we do on climate change all around the world? That's an actual statistic. What about the fact that the Department of Defense is the largest institutional climate polluter in the world? There's a lot of things we should be questioning. So if there are a bunch of bases here in Pennsylvania, I'd agitate and work against that. You know, there's a lot we can do. Why do I single out the DoD? Because, well, this is the entire apparatus that also keeps people out. Lastly, I'll just say, you know, immigration. Isn't immigration all part of our responsibility towards refugees, towards forcibly displaced people? Notice the terminology. We only talk about this thing in terms of immigration. To Ilyas's point about young people and social justice, the only reason we're having this conversation today is because Black, brown, migrants, and immigrant populations in this world ensured that climate change was an issue of equity and justice. Until that, the big greens were only concerned with the environmental effects of it. There was no conversation about intersectionality. In 1992, we have the Rio Declaration because of those marginalized populations I mentioned. So you can also approach it from a very positive standpoint of if you don't have those types of people in your society, will you actually know how to think about things from a justice lens?
Thank you for that, and I appreciate the point, yes. On the levers of change, the business community, the activists, the youth, the educators, our social leaders. Sunday, can I give you the last word here in 1 minute if you can share any responses you have in terms of, again, the rallying around awareness?
I mean, after those comments, I'm not sure that I have the charge, but let me just leave you with this thought. You know, the local to global piece is critical, but change really does come within. And I think part of the really critical charge that we each have is what is our real intent with engaging? Really asking ourselves what our intent is. And that is the start of the pathway to creating change. It's the start to figuring out how do we listen better? How do we become much more inclusive in our engagement with others? And how do we take the steps that I think Ilyas has mentioned? I think those are really incredible steps. So I always say, let's start with purpose. Let's start with our individual purpose and our individual intent, and let that be a guide for us in terms of how we move forward. So thank you.
Thank you, thank you. I told you it was a rock star panel. Let's give them a hand, please. And now I'm gonna cut across this stage. Morgan, if you can join me at the podium. All right. I hope you are feeling energized. I know I am for what's ahead throughout this day. But next up, I'm excited to welcome Morgan McCrae, who will move us through the last part of this plenary. Morgan is a junior at Oakland Catholic High School, and she's our Youth Voice Fellow at the World Affairs Council. She also interns at SLB Radio Productions, where they use radio and media to amplify the voices of young people in order to educate and build community. As a youth fellow at the World Affairs Council of Pittsburgh, Morgan believes that youth voice is the future and the present. Morgan.
Thank you so much, Betty, and good morning, everyone. As mentioned, my name is Morgan McCrae, and I am a Youth Voice Fellow for the World Affairs Council of Pittsburgh. Our Youth Fellowship and Youth Board are both a part of the Council's work to amplify youth voices. Our Council aims to foster curiosity in global issues, engage and connect students of all backgrounds, and drive meaningful change while creating space for young people to lead and collaborate. In the spirit of amplifying youth voice, it is my honor today to announce the recipient of the 2024 OMLR Award. The OMLR Award recognizes a teacher who does an exemplary job of uplifting youth voice and youth leadership. This teacher goes above and beyond to work alongside and amplify the voice of young people, as well as encouraging their community to do the same. This year's recipient was nominated among a competitive pool of candidates, and the nominations were reviewed and selected by an objective committee of the Council's Youth Board members. According to her students, this year's OMLR Award winner is described as dynamic, passionate, dedicated, transformative, and caring. She encourages her students to be change makers, to use their voice to lead projects and take a part in advocacy. So, without further ado, the 2024 OMLR Award goes to Mrs. Julianne Slogic of Mount Lebanon High School. Oh my God.
So I'm truly flattered to be here, and I'm looking out at all of you. You know, you are the architects of the future, and you are doing the work now, and the work has to be transformational. You know, every day I get to do this work, and I think about those of you who are the artists and the performers and the writers and the human rights advocates and the linguistics and the future business leaders, the data numbers, the crunchers. I think of all of my students who come into my room, and I have the chance and the privilege of interacting with them. And I'm looking directly at my students because they are incredible influencers in our building, but I want to encourage all of you youth here, to continue to be those influencers in your own space, because we need you and we're counting on you. Thank you so much for this recognition. I'm truly touched. Thank you.
Wow, that was powerful. Please join me in congratulating our recipient one more time with a round of applause. Thank you. We also want to take time to thank all of the educators here with us today. As Sherry put it earlier, the power to challenge this crisis, it is within all of us, and it's all in our hands. And it takes all of us to work together to make sustainable change. The participation of the young people in our audience would not be possible without the partnership of teachers and other adult allies. So please join me in recognizing our educators with another round of applause. We will close our morning plenary with a poetry reading by the 2022-2023 Youth Poet Laureate of Allegheny County, Ro Bloom Wang. Ro, I'll turn it over to you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Ro Bloom Wong. Thank you so much for having me. I'm going to read 2 poems today, starting with one I wrote titled When I Grow Up. When I grow up, I want to be unrecognizable, unafraid of the predators I serve and afraid of those I've become. I want to seethe against my scarring silence, but fear blades and scrapes. To be clearly queer and queerly clear, floating tranquil among cacti, but rooted deep in moss-soaked ground. I want to scream, but only where it matters, and whisper where it does too. To care enough, but not this much. To be flannel, soft and warm and strong and worn, woven from tiny threads and shades. To be a jar of droplets, infinity stacked up upon itself because infinity minus 1 is still infinity. Water never really dies, it just seeps into air and skin and stays there, pleasantly present or rushing, untrusting, but never the murky, mucky, yucky stuff I am now. I want to be the bad good parts that frown and think too much, but not the good bad parts that stay sweet a little too long. To belong, to myself, but not this self, to be layers of river and clay and colors, everything I am and everything I am not. Thank you. So when I think of water, I think of like this cyclical nature. And what's so compelling to me about water as a metaphor is that it has no boundaries, it knows no borders. It's like this very ever shifting and global thing. And to me, that means it's also a symbol of unity and interconnectedness. So perhaps water can be not only a metaphor, but also an aspiration. And with that, I'm going to finish with a poem by the poet Khalil Gibran, which was kindly introduced to me by Miss Kathleen Newell, and I think it perfectly captures this idea. The River Cannot Go Back by Khalil Gibran. It is said that before entering the sea, a river trembles with fear. She looks back at the path she has traveled, from the peaks of the mountains, the long winding road crossing forests and villages, and in front of her, she sees an ocean so vast that to enter there seems nothing more than to disappear forever. But there is no other way. The river cannot go back. Nobody can go back. To go back is impossible in existence. The river needs to take the risk of entering the ocean because only then will fear disappear. Because that's where the river will know it's not about disappearing into the ocean, but of becoming the ocean. Thank you so much.
Wow, thank you so much, Ro, and congratulations to Miss Logic again. And now it is time for all of you to move into your tracks. So if you are a high school student, please see your name tag and agenda for which room you need to be in. For everyone else, please head to the Change Makers Across Sector session, which is taking place in the lower lounge.